The mission to Sasi village was supposed to be simple, almost insulting in its ease. Boar hunting, they had said, a task more befitting new recruits than true magic knights. Osta had complained loudly the entire way. Magna had laughed it off, and Noel had remained quiet, her thoughts buried beneath layers of expectation and uncertainty. None of them realized that by the time the sun dipped low behind the hills, this mission would carve itself into their lives forever. The first sign that something was wrong came not from sight, but from sensation. The warmth of the day vanished abruptly, replaced by a biting cold that seeped through clothing and skin alike. Frost crawled across the ground as though alive, crystallizing grass and stone in unnatural patterns. The villagers noticed it too, fear rippling through their small gathering like a shockwave. Then the ice began to rise, jagged spears bursting from the earth without warning, tearing through fences and shattering homes. Panic erupted as people fled, clutching children and shouting warnings that came far too late. Asta moved on. Instinct, the black sword in his hands, felt heavier than usual, as though responding to the pressure of the moment. He swung without hesitation, the blade cleaving through ice and magic alike, erasing spells as though they were nothing more than mist. The mysterious mage revealed himself then, stepping calmly through the frozen chaos, his expression unreadable. When Asta reflected one of his attacks back at him, the man's lips curved into something between interest and disdain. He acknowledged the sword's power easily, almost casually, and then dismissed it just as quickly, summoning wave after wave of ice with effortless precision, forcing Asta and Magna to split apart as they struggled to keep the villagers from being torn apart. Magna's flames roared defiantly against the cold, but even he could feel the difference in power. Each spell he cast took more effort than the last, his breath growing ragged as sweat froze on his skin. He glanced at Osta, who was moving faster than seemed humanly possible, deflecting spells while shouting encouragement and promises that he would protect everyone. Noelle stood behind them, hands clenched around her wand, her magic raging violently inside her, but refusing to obey. The familiar terror crept in again, that fear of losing control, of hurting someone she meant to protect. Royal blood pulsed in her veins, yet at that moment, she felt smaller than anyone there. The enemy pressed closer, deliberately herding them back, forcing them to fight defensively. Magna realized, with growing dread, that his reserves were nearly empty. Anasta's body was beginning to betray him, muscles trembling from repeated strain. This was no longer a test of skill. It was a battle of endurance. They were losing. The thought struck. Magna Hardis was their first real mission, and it might be their last. Then a voice cut through the chaos, small but clear. A little girl, standing with her grandfather, looked past the flames and ice and met Noelle's eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also trust, raw and unfiltered. She begged for help, not as a subject to royalty, not as someone who understood magic or power, but as a child asking someone stronger to protect her. Something inside Noel cracked. All the voices that had told her to hold back, to stay silent, to avoid failure, were drowned out by a single, overwhelming truth. If she didn't act now, people would die. Her grimoire trembled violently, pages flipping on their own, as her magic surged in response to her resolve. Magic grimoires were not static things. They were reflections of their owner's growth, shaped by effort, emotion, and the willingness to move forward. A new spell formed, born not from pride or heritage, but from an unshakable desire to protect. When Noelle raised her wand, the water answered her call, exploding outward in a powerful torrent that wrapped around the villagers in a living barrier. Ice shattered harmlessly against it, reduced to glittering fragments that fell uselessly to the ground. For the first time since the battle began, the enemy hesitated. The sheer volume of her magic was undeniable, and Noelle herself seemed stunned by it, though she refused to let that show. She straightened, standing between the villagers and the threat, declaring her resolve not as a noble, but as a magic knight of the Black Bulls. In that moment, something shifted. She was no longer running from who she was. The Ice Mage adapted quickly. He had been watching, waiting for weakness, and he found it when Ostecha charged again, pushing his exhausted body too far. A single misstep on the frozen ground stole his momentum, and in that instant the enemy struck, slamming him down with crushing force. Standing over Osta, the mage mocked him mercilessly, dismissing anti-magic as meaningless in the hands of a boy with no magic of his own. A killing spell began to form, dense and lethal. Enough power gathered to erase a life in an instant. Magna moved before he thought. Pain flared through his body as he forced himself forward, flames bursting from his hands despite the emptiness clawing at his core. He knew he was outmatched. He knew the odds. For a fleeting moment, doubt threatened to crush him completely. Then memories flooded in Ryaka Village dusty streets. The day he was handed his magic night robe, the voices that had cheered his name, the promise he had made to prove he was more than his past. If this was where he fell, then he would fall fighting. He hurled his magic forward in what seemed like a final, desperate attack, his entire body screaming in protest. The enemy laughed, dismissing it as a pointless gesture. That was when Osta rose, battered but unbroken, and swung his sword. The reflected spell hit with perfect timing, amplifying Magna's flames and warping them into something new. The fire didn't explode. It tightened, reshaped, bound. Chains of flame wrapped around the enemy, searing and immobilizing him completely. Magna stared, barely able to breathe. For the first time in his life, he had controlled his magic perfectly. What had once been reckless fire had evolved into restraint, into precision. Flame-binding magic. The Ice Mage collapsed, defeated not by overwhelming power, but by stubborn resolve and teamwork he had never anticipated. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of cheering. The villagers rushed forward, crying, laughing, bowing, thanking the Black Bulls again and again. Magna stood in a daze, barely registering their words, until Osta slapped him on the back with a grin wide enough to hurt. Noelle watched quietly, a small smile forming as she realized that all of them had changed in some way during this battle. Later, as the fires died down and the ice melted away, a young boy approached Magna and asked if someone like him could become a magic knight one day. Magna answered without hesitation, telling him that nothing was impossible, that effort and belief mattered more than where you came from. Osta loudly declared that by the time the kid joined, he would be even closer to becoming the Wizard King, earning an exasperated sigh from Noelle and laughter from the villagers. As they prepared to leave, Nero snatched a small magic stone, a keepsake once carried by a villager's grandfather. Far away, unseen figures took notice. The stone had been found exactly as planned. They decided to let the Black Bulls keep it for now. The time was not yet right. The battle at Sassi Village ended in peace, but its echoes traveled far beyond the frozen fields. What began as a simple mission had become the first step towards something far darker and far greater. The resurrection they awaited was drawing closer, and the world would soon feel the consequences.